afternoon. I'm excited to introduce two distinguished leaders who are dedicating their careers to public service. First, I'd like to introduce our moderator and fellow Rotarian, Judge Bill Pryor. Judge Pryor serves as the Chief Judge of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. Previously, he was our 45th Attorney General, serving from 1997 to 2004. When he was elected, he was the youngest Attorney General in the nation. He graduated from Tulane Law School, first in class for common law curriculum, and editor-in-chief of the Tulane Law Review. He has been published in journals and reviews at Yale, Columbia, Harvard, Notre Dame, and many more. He also pulled off something I thought was impossible, which is op-ed pieces in both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. So please welcome fellow Rotarian and our moderator for today, Judge Bill Pryor. I'm also excited to introduce Senator Tim Scott from the state of South Carolina. I had the privilege of hearing him speak a few years ago and was immediately inspired by his message. I picked up his book called Unified, and he talked about working together, working towards unity, not a message of division. It was a message of finding harmony within our diversity and using our diversity as a strength in our great nation. I learned how he overcame challenges in his life. To paraphrase his most recent book, the data, experiences, and history all would have said that he should have failed because he was born poor and into a single parent household. But he did not. He overcame those challenges with his faith, his determination, and his hard work. He took advantages of opportunities with mentors like Ed, the master mechanic who lived in his neighborhood, and John, the local franchisee of a Chick-fil-A. And he learned from those opportunities and continued to work hard to become the SGA president, a star football player, a successful small business owner, serving in the state house, a congressman, and then a U.S. senator. One piece of legislation that I wanted to highlight was his work on opportunity zones. It was a bipartisan effort with Senator Cory Booker and others. It infused billions of dollars into impoverished communities throughout the nation, including many communities throughout our state. It was a great win for the country, a great win for our state, and really appreciate him reaching across the aisle to make that happen. And he is not done yet. He has a mission to positively affect the lives of 1 billion people with a B through his message of hope and opportunity. Please welcome Senator Tim Scott.
Senator?
Yes, sir.
Welcome to Birmingham.
Thank you, Judge Pryor. Thank you for moderating today's discussion as well.
Well, we really have been excited about your visit. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background? And
Sure.
we've heard the introduction from Danny, but if you will, what led you into public service?
Well, as Danny mentioned, and thank you, Danny, for your kind introduction and dinner last night. It's so good to meet your dad and your brother as well. Mr. McKinney, I'm a fan of yours without any question. I know there are 3 McKinneys in the room. I'm talking about the eldest. So, Mr. McKinney, the daddy. So for me, I was raised in a single parent household, mired in poverty, hopeless in many ways. My parents got divorced when I was about 7 years old. And from 7 to 14, I kind of just drifted. How many of y'all know that all drifting leads in the wrong direction? Only about 3 of y'all. Okay. So as a freshman in high school, I think life basically compounded on top of my shoulders. And as a freshman, I basically failed my freshman year in high school. I failed both Spanish and English. Now, when you fail Spanish and English, no one calls you bilingual. They all call you by ignorant because you can't speak in any language. That's where I found my unhappy self. I also failed world geography and civics. Now, civics is the study of politics. Tells me that God has a sense of humor because here I sit before you as a United States Senator. And I had two major blessings in my life, though. One was a Chick-fil-A operator, John Moniz, who taught me that anyone from anywhere at any time could think their way out of poverty, not to suggest those in poverty aren't thinking, but to suggest the kid that almost failed out of high school wasn't using his brain. The other blessing I had was a powerful, positive mama who always taught me that if you just shoot for the moon, even if you miss, you'll be among the stars. If I heard that once, I heard it 1,000 times. Unfortunately, at the end of my freshman year, I wasn't doing so well. So she came home, she worked double shifts 3 days a week, 16 hours a day, and 2 days a week she worked 8-hour shifts. And she was a nurse's aide, which basically means she changed bedpans and rolled patients. But she taught me that there was dignity in all work. And so when she came home at 11:30 one night, she looked at my report card. She looked at me. She looked back at my report card. And she said, "Timmy." I said, "I know, Mama, I know. I should have shot for the moon." She said, no, sweetheart, you missed that lesson." So she took me outside, 11:30 at night, and she said, "Let's go over to this tree." So I walked over to the tree, Judge, and she said, "Pick a branch." Pick the branch. She said, "Take the leaves off." And she introduced me to a new form of encouragement. For those of you not from Alabama, a switch is a Southern apparatus of encouragement. And she applied it liberally on my backside. I have never failed another subject for the rest of my life. But it was that combination between a conservative guy who happened to be a Christian, who saw something in me that I could not see in myself, and a mother who always believed that there was something special about her son. And one of the reasons why I'm so bullish on the future of this country is because in my worst days, in the darkest of my hours, I had people who believed in me when I could not believe in myself. But they taught me to take individual responsibility for myself. And they said that if I would, then I could. But if I would not, I should not succeed.
The encouragement at my house came in the form of a belt.
Yes,
So,
yes.
I'm not sure which of us was better off.
Well, I don't want to race on that one.
So I take it you've already alluded to this. You would describe yourself as a political conservative.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
So tell us, as a Black conservative,
Yeah.
what kind of stereotypes have you encountered in your public life, really from all sides?
Absolutely. Well, I think anytime you decide to do something that's unusual in modern society, you should expect some resistance. And I remember my first run for office, I went to the Democrat Party and checked them out, went to the Republican Party and checked them out. The Democrat Party said, "You might have a future, but you're going to get in line and wait your turn." The Republican Party said, "You know you're Black." I'm like, "I do know I'm Black." He says, "No, we've never had a Black person win a county race in the history of the state, not since Reconstruction. But if you want to run, feel free." I was like, well, I can run now or wait. And then I looked at the issues that I cared most about. And philosophically, I've always been a conservative. But since everybody that I knew that happened to look like me was a Democrat, I felt like I owed history the chance. And so I became a Republican very quickly. But I will say that being in public life on the federal level as a conservative that happens to be Black is a fairly painful experience on a daily basis. You're misunderstood sometimes on both sides of the aisle, to be honest with you. The bigotry that I feel the most comes from the left, to be frank. I've been called everything except for a child of God by most of my folks. And then the people who've gone to jail plotting to kill me have mostly been on the other side. I have two guys that have been arrested. And you just think about the disconnect from reality, that people will hunt you because of your ideology and how inconsistent with reality that actually is. And I think about the misunderstanding that people especially African Americans in my community, have about the Republican Party. They probably are looking back to the Southern strategy in the Atwater days, which the Republican Party did a terrible job of selling the game of addition. But the truth is, last 4 or 5 years, what you've seen is the Republican Party has been the party that stood up for advancing the cause of historically Black colleges and universities and bringing the funding to the highest level in the history of the country. And for the first time, it was the Republican Party having majorities on both houses and President Trump in office that led to permanent funding for HBCUs. It was at least my party, you're a judge, so you don't have a party, but it was a conservative party that fought for sickle cell anemia and its funding. It was a conservative party that brought the African American and the Hispanic unemployment rates to the lowest rate in the history of the country and a 70-year low for women. It was a conservative party that created 7 million jobs, 2/3 going to women, Hispanics, and African Americans. So a part of the challenge I think that we as Republicans have with minority communities is that we don't go where we're not invited and we don't tell the story. I mean, the fact is that almost everyone I go talk to in minority communities say, I didn't know that y'all worked on historically Black colleges and universities and its funding. I didn't know about sickle cell anemia. I didn't know much about the opportunity zones. I didn't know about your work on education. Did not know your work on charter schools. I did not know your work on the farm bill that included African American farmers for the first time getting a farm number. There's so many victories that we have as a party, but we have not done a good job of explaining and articulating that there is a conservative way to address some of the challenges that our nation faces, that a centralized approach always corrodes the fabric and an independent approach always lifts people up.
If you don't mind, I'm going to follow up a little bit
Yes,
on
sir.
that. And so I asked, what kind of things have you faced from all sides? I do know, though, that there have been times when you have opposed nominees that have come forward from your own party
Absolutely.
because of racial insensitivity, right?
Yeah, a couple of judges, as a matter of fact. There's a judge, that guy, not him, right? So it's just common sense should, I checked him out, he's good to go. Anyways, so yeah, there were a couple of judges in 2016, 2020 that were to be nominated, and one guy who played a role in a Senate campaign where they used black hands and white hands to tell white folks not to vote for the Black candidate. And then they also talked about the jobs that were being stolen by minorities. And I just am never going to vote for someone who seems to be, they have a predetermined outcome, and that their bias will permeate a permanent seat on the court. That's not in the best interest of the country. And so I told my party that I was not going to vote for that candidate. They thought I was kidding, so they decided they were going to bring him up for a vote. I pitched a little hissy fit, and we were able to avoid that vote, and they withdrew that candidate, and then that happened again. So my honest opinion about politics is most people, most of the time, don't trust elected officials because we do stupid things. And so the easiest way to be honest is to be transparent in your honesty. Don't just be honest, but you have to be transparent in your honesty and be available for the criticism, the critiques on both sides. And so I try my very best to be not a Republican, but a conservative, and a conservative who's anchored in biblical values. And if I can't find it in the gospel, I'm typically not going to vote for it. And if it's wrong in the gospel, then it's wrong for me. And discrimination on either side is bad. And it corrodes the public forum when you don't stand up against challenging times.
There are major challenges with gun violence
Yes.
across the United States. Birmingham's no stranger to that. What kind of gun safety or gun control measures do you think could win your vote?
Well, certainly one of the things that we did in the latest iteration of the gun debate was I was very much in support of providing about, I think it was $38 billion for hardening or securing our schools and providing more resources for those who are mentally challenged, and doing a good job on our NICS background checks. NICS is a system, federal system, where you're supposed to report information, but not everyone does. And so it creates holes in the system. If you think about the Mother Emanuel church shooting in Charleston, South Carolina, That was the result of a breakdown in a system that should have worked. It did not work. And because it did not work, the racist got a gun and went to the church and killed 9 African Americans, to include my good friend Clemente Pinckney, Democrat state senator and pastor of the church where my uncle attended for 50 years. Had that system worked, he would not have been able to get a gun legally. And so we fixed some of those issues. That failed because my friends on the other side wanted to target the not just the weapons, but the entire Second Amendment from my perspective, not the entire Second Amendment, but too much of the Second Amendment. And my theory is that when you literally think about gun violence in our country, the first thing we should take a look at is the 30,000+ gun-related deaths in America, and ask yourself, what is the predominant factor in those gun-related deaths? And what you'll find very quickly is that a little more than 60% of gun-related deaths are suicides. And when you get down to the homicides, it's the overwhelming majority are handguns. And you can go to less than 2% of all the cities in this country, and you get 1 out of every 4 homicides. So we have a problem that we can solve, but you don't solve it by whitewashing the issue or making people feel better by the legislation. We should do better with our actions.
So we have in the economic realm, a workforce participation problem.
Yes.
And over the next decade, it looks as if that will become more of a problem, and that perhaps immigration is part of the answer to that problem. So what do you think about what the immigration policy for our country should look like, particularly as you're balancing the labor market and enabling economic growth?
I do think, Judge, that one of the things we have to do on the issue of immigration is bifurcate the issue. There is an issue of immigration that has to do with illegal immigration, and then there's the issue of immigration that has to do with the front door or legal immigration to meet the workforce needs of the future of this country. In order for us to find a bipartisan deal on the front door, I think we literally have to create a back door. If you've been watching the news, frankly, in the last several days, the one thing you'll notice is that we've seen the highest increase in illegal crossings in the history of the country. In the last 2 years, we've seen a 325% increase in July in illegal crossings. Well over 2 million folks will cross our borders illegally on the southern border. Now, many people see that as merely an immigration issue. I think we missed the point. We need a southern barrier because it's really hard to control what happens in your country if you don't control the flow into your country. And so if you think about our southern border as an existential threat from a national security standpoint, I think you start crystallizing the importance of the southern border and the conversation around it. There is a reason why someone who wanted to assassinate President Bush walked across our southern border, because it's easy to do so. There's a reason why there are 27 individuals on our national security risk lists that were crossing our southern border, because it's easy to do so. There's a reason why there are people from 155 different countries walking across our southern border, because it's easy to do so. It is first and foremost a national security risk. That is the primary reason why we should start the construction. Second reason is, if you look at the fact that we've had over 107,000 people die to overdoses, fentanyl walks across our southern border. It is part and parcel to the drug epidemic that we are seeing today. And then third, and still importantly, it is an illegal immigration issue, whereas we should address it by stemming the tide. And actually, I'd say close the door, but there's no door to close. And that's a big part of the problem. So we need to build the impediment, whether it's a fence, whether it's smart fence, whether it's using sometimes nature itself is the berm that we need. So we need to figure that out, but we need something physically to stop people from crossing our borders. second part of that conversation, which I think is the part that perhaps most business people in the room may care about, is that we need a meritocracy on the front door. We literally need to improve our immigration policies in such a way that we allow more of what our workforce needs to come in the front door and or stay here when they come on visas for education. I'm not sure why we continue to educate our competition and then send them home. It doesn't make sense to me. If you're 18 to 22 years old and you're good enough to spend 4 years in America to get educated, and then you're going back home to your country to start a company to compete against our company, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think we should be able to extend visas, but we should have a meritocracy where we turn the front door into a 60-40 ratio, where we're having 60% of those immigrants coming through seeking the 4-year degree, and then we have 40% of those folks coming through the front door, meeting our agriculture, blue collar, and other needs. You're able to bring, on the last iteration of this debate, you were able to bring your spouse and your dependent kids with you. Everybody else gets in a different line. But the truth is, until we fix the back door, it is impossible to have a serious conversation about increasing the number of immigrants coming in through the front door. By the way, America's growing older, faster. By the year of 2040-ish.
And having fewer children.
Absolutely. So we're not replacing ourselves, number one. And number two, if 1 out of 5 Americans will be over the age of 65 in the next 20 years, including me. I know y'all thought it was 25, but I'm not. So that's funnier than they're laughing. But anyway, so the truth is, y'all believe
All right, I was laughing when they talked about how I used to be the youngest attorney general in the country. And all I could think was, as I sat here, was I've gotten older.
Right. We've gotten wiser. You've gotten wiser, yes. And so I think when we see America aging and graying, the need to replace the workforce that pays the tax revenues to support our entitlement state will become a far bigger problem than we see today.
So one follow-up on that. So you mentioned extending visas for those who have come here to be educated.
Yes.
So I take it from that you view the limitation on those visas as a real impediment for deterrent for those who would like, after having been educated here, to stay.
I do. I think it's not in our best interest. Once again, if the vetting process was as good as it should have been, and I believe that it is, sending the best educated kids from our best schools, Alabama, Auburn, South Carolina, and Clemson, back home.
Man,
Back home to.
I can tell you've been reelected.
My bad, UAB as well. All the way back over to China and India to compete against us just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
So do you have any concerns about election fraud? And are there legislative measures that you think might be in order?
You know, I had a big fight with my friends on the other side over their legislation, HR 1, which was to nationalize elections. Our Constitution is pretty clear. Elections are state and local, not nationalized. I am very excited about the work that I've seen in Texas and Florida. And frankly, Governor Kemp in Georgia did a very good job of closing the problems in the 2020, which included things like they had for the first time massive waves of mail-in ballots with no verification. No signature verification, no nothing. Pennsylvania did the same thing. How you adopt a brand new way of voting with no verification in it that's a bad thing. The fact that these states, I'm not sure that Pennsylvania has done so, but other states have done so, they've closed that hole, I think is a very good thing. And frankly, my opponents on the other side said that this was going to lead to a suppression of minority votes. And I was on the floor talking about espousing the virtues of the new Georgia law. And in the middle of a banking hearing where Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs had all signed on in opposition to the Georgia law, I asked the CEOs, what don't you like about the law?
Yeah, what'd they say?
90 seconds, they didn't say a single word in the middle of a hearing. Watched on C-SPAN. All 38 of us watched that on C-SPAN, and literally stunned by their silence. And what happened as a result of the 2022 election, after the laws were changed, the highest turnout in a midterm election of minorities and overall in the state of Georgia. So what we proved was that whether or not you can get water while you're in line is not necessarily the biggest impediment to your ability to vote. Had you watched the news, you would have thought that that one thing was the biggest issue ever in voting in this country. Inconsistent with reality. And frankly, we've been able to prove that. And so I'm thankful for the changes that have tightened up and restored confidence in voting.
So what are your reflections on January 6th? What needs to happen specifically to prevent that kind of an attack on the Capitol from ever happening again?
Well, I noticed that a lot of people have my books around the tables, and I might even sign some if you want me to sign your books. If you don't want me to sign your books, I understand. But one of the things I talk about in the book is January 6th and how being the person hunted in the chamber does give you a personal perspective on what happened. I remember rolling my sleeves up and taking my tie off and my jacket off and assuming that I was going to have to fight until I die. And looking for some kind of a weapon. I found some pins that I could use as weapons. And literally thinking through that in the moment was a horrifying experience. And hearing people coming down the halls looking for you and being stuck in a chamber where the upper chambers were wide open. So we were like fish in a pond. You could shoot all of us if you got in there. And then finding a way of escape and then dealing with the chaos of it. The way I look at it is that the people who bear the responsibility are the ones that came into the Capitol, and only they bear that responsibility. I believe that ultimately people of good conscience consistently do the right thing in this country. And I don't think I'm naive since I was in the chamber. I'm not very concerned about a repeat, to be honest with you. I am concerned about the polarization and the division that uses January 6th, that uses these unusual once in a lifetime events against both sides in order to keep polarization as a means of monetizing and creating profits based on conflict.
How much of that is encouraged, do you think, or at least welcomed by foreign adversaries?
Well, if you think about 2016, 2020 election cycles, the folks that were running some of the major groups in opposition in the election process were run by the Russians, run by the Chinese. What the world now knows is that the divisions in this amazing country can be used for political gain. And so they literally have used Facebook and social platforms to sow seeds of doubt, to encourage violence and aggression against people based on racial groups, based on class, because they figured out that it must work. So just keep fanning the flames. That to me is important information for us to digest as a country. I see us as one big American family. I think we need to learn to act like one because the rest of the world knows that the only way to beat this great nation is from the inside and not from the outside.
So let's go to a less controversial subject, the latest Supreme Court decision in Dobbs.
Yes. I am so glad to be in Birmingham getting all these softballs thrown my way.
Well, as the senator knows, we solicited questions from the members instead of having a complete free-for-all. So abortion, the sanctity of human life is a big issue. What do you see as what's your perspective about the issue and your perspective about the best way forward now that the political and legal landscape has changed?
Yeah, I think, once again, I think clarity is so important. We received so little of it in the first several days after the decision. You would have thought that abortion had become illegal, sea to shining sea. And frankly, nothing is further from the truth than that. Number two, I would say that as a guy who's pro-life, unabashedly, unashamedly, and excitedly pro-life, I think we are going to see a drop in abortions, but I think we're also going to see an increase in late-term abortions. One of the challenges that we saw in the Commonwealth under Governor Northam, who is a pediatrician, I believe it was, he suggested that infanticide, abortions up until the day of birth, is okay. To think that that's going to be the position in some states, to me, is very frightening, that we've literally opened up an avenue for an extreme position on an incredible topic. Not to mention that we are one of 7 nations that allows abortions after week 15, maybe even week 12. 7 out of 193 was the last time I checked. So I think we're heading in the right direction. I think science is on my side as it relates to being a pro-life person. I think it's continue to move in the right direction. So I hope that we continue to see real information and facts around this really important issue of life.
We talked a bit earlier in the introduction about the role you've played in introducing opportunity zone legislation, and that's been significant in a lot of places, including here.
Yes, sir.
How would you assess the impact of that legislation so far, and what changes do you see for that legislation on the horizon?
I know that, I believe that you all have an organization here called Opal, run by someone named Alex. Is Alex here? Let's give Alex a hand. I'll tell you what. My understanding is that no less than $350 million has been invested in opportunity zones because of the efforts of Opal and so many others. Those are real dollars going into real communities, creating the type of transformation that is incredibly important to the poorest kids living in marginalized communities, that gives them hope that they would not have without something like Opal. I will say that one of the reasons why I created opportunity zones was because as that kid at 7 years old, moving back in with my grandparents, mired in poverty, surrounded by scarcity, I saw brilliant kids make bad choices because they felt like there was no other way. I always hoped that there was a way to bring opportunities closer to the kids, as opposed to telling the kids, yeah, the world is your oyster. Well, that's not true if you don't think it's true. And certainly when you're 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14 years old, you don't see that. So bringing those resources into the poorest neighborhoods through a tax incentive, all private dollars, no public dollars, is incredibly beneficial. The future of opportunity zones, I hope, is bright. 2 things I think we need to do. Number 1 is we need reporting requirements so that we know the good that's happening. And if it's not happening, we should know that too. So I think clarity and transparency are really important for people to understand the incredible benefit of opportunity zones. By the way, in 2019, $29 billion were invested in opportunity zones, leading to the lowest level of poverty in the history of America. About $80 billion so far has been committed to opportunity zones. The second thing I'd like to see is an extension of opportunity zones for another 2 or 3 years and restore the 15% step up in bases and give people another shot at it, and give the governors more opportunities to designate more of their impoverished or low income areas into opportunity zones.
And that was bipartisan legislation. You worked with Senator Booker on that?
I did, Judge. I worked with Senator Booker on the creation of opportunity zones, but it was passed on a Republican-only vote during the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Oh. So how about police reform? I think that too has been an important part of your work. What kind of reforms still need to happen to ensure that everyone's rights are being protected in a non-discriminatory way?
Absolutely. One of the reasons why I got involved with police reform early on was because of my own personal experience. I think sometimes the good Lord gives you every single characteristic that you have so that you serve a bigger purpose than just yourself. And having been stopped 22 times the last 2 decades, 5 times in the last 12 months for just driving while black. It does inform and educate you on the need to make sure that only the best wear the badge. And at the same time, having watched really good friends of mine who are law enforcement officers lose their best friends who are just trying to serve the community, it tells me that telling both sides of the ledger is really important. Coming to the conclusion that the vast majority, overwhelming majority of officers simply want to do their jobs, go home to their family, not for the money, but because it's a mission for them. So giving them the money and the training necessary to keep themselves safe and the communities where they serve should be a very important ingredient in the next iteration of police reform. It's one of the reasons why we're seeing President Biden now turn towards police reform. It's because crime has spiked and violent crime is in many ways out of control. When you have, you know this better than I do, sir, but when you have prosecutors who are wearing blindfolds and letting violent criminals out the day after they're caught, you should expect more violent crime. When you have a system that is not looking to create a level playing field, but literally becoming weak on crime, you should expect an explosion of more crime. When you have a movement to defund the police that passed in major city after major city after major city, from Los Angeles to several cities in the state to the East Coast, you should not be surprised when you see a 45% increase in homicide in 2 years. And unfortunately, not only do we unfortunately see a 45% increase in homicide, 85% of that increase are African Americans and Hispanics. So the movement that was supposed to make the world and the communities a safer place actually has led to a skyrocketing of deaths around this country. And so providing the resources and the training is absolutely essential. And I have recommended no less than a $3 billion increase. The difference between my approach and the other side's approach in this iteration of police reform, the first two, they wanted to defund smaller agencies because of accreditation. I said no to those. I stayed at the table, but I'm not going to treat a rural part of Alabama or rural part of South Carolina with 10 officers the same way I'm going to treat the Chicago Police Department or the New York City Police Department with thousands of officers. You just can't expect that. And so that was one of the major hiccups. This time around, I will not tie funding to a nationalized approach to local police. It makes too many departments in southern states like ours ineligible for federal grants. So that's the wrong direction. So I have to sever that cord in order to continue the discussion on police reform. And we can never challenge their qualified immunity if we're going to get to a deal.
Yeah, so I don't know if people understand what that's about, qualified immunity. I certainly do. And that's a raging debate in law. So when if a federal civil rights lawsuit is filed against a police officer, the lawsuit may allege that whatever the police officer did in encountering a suspect or a detainee, someone violated their federal civil rights. But sometimes the law in that area is uncertain. And historically, the law has provided some protection for officers called qualified immunity, where they're not subject to a lawsuit. They're immune from a lawsuit if the decision that they made, even though it may have violated the law, was one that they could have reasonably thought was lawful, right?
Exactly. And case in point, Colorado decided to have a $25,000 threshold for local law enforcement to be responsible. Mm-hmm. What they saw was a class of 100 recruits go down to like 8. So if you're looking for a panacea, you've just eliminated the entire conversation about solutions. The panacea that they sought actually was antithetical to people being recruited into police work. That's bad for every community. And frankly, the false narrative that there's a binary choice between law enforcement and communities of color is a false binary. If you want to support one, you have to support the other. And it's the reason why 80% of African Americans and even a larger percentage of Hispanics want the same level of policing or more policing. And that